All right. Hello, everyone. We are very lucky today to be joined by Jennifer Brandel from Hearken. We are in Sydney, Australia at the Editors Lab with Walkley's Foundation. It's a 2-day hackathon on audience engagement. So we are happy to call upon the expertise of Jennifer. And she is going to give a presentation for our participants. She's joining us from Chicago. We're in Sydney. I said that already. I'll give her the floor.
Great. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I have to apologize about my voice. I have a throat situation going on. So if I start coughing or hacking, I'll try and mute myself to spare you and then join you. I have 3 different beverages here, various hot, cold, and in between to help just in case that happens. So I'm going to start a screen share right now with my presentation here. I guess I'll assume that you can see it unless I hear you jump in and say you can't. It should say hacking the status quo journo workflow because I love rhymes. So if you can't see a screen that's white with that on it, please pipe up and then we'll figure out why you can't. But meantime, I will proceed apace. So I wanted to take you through a few things today. So first and foremost, who am I? What have I tried? How has it worked? And then some lessons that we've learned along the way, tech-wise and otherwise, and they'll be threaded a little bit in between. So to begin with, who am I? So I used to be a journalist. I don't know if once a journalist, always a journalist, but I was a practicing journalist for about 10 years, mostly at WBEZ in Chicago, which hopefully you've heard of a couple of products that have come out of that station, like This American Life, Serial. Those are some of the famous shows that have come out of there, but it's also a local public media station that provides, audio content, great digital content, events, all that kind of stuff. And in 2012, I founded a series there called Curious City. It's a pun on the word curiosity, and I'll take you more through that shortly. And in it, I was trying to run a particular experiment that I'll take you through that had a lot of technical repercussions. And then now, what I've been doing since 2015 is really taking the lessons learned at WBEZ and applying them at scale to more newsrooms around the world. So now I run a company called Hearken, which means to listen. So I'm going to take you through that, but I also wanted to say, because I'm so excited that I'm joining folks in Australia, I love Australia. I actually had a couple chapters of my life before now that were featured in Australia. So in 2002, I was a student at the University of Melbourne studying witchcraft and contemporary Aboriginal art, which was super fun. And then I returned back to Australia, but to Hobart, Tasmania in 2005 to pick grapes on a very young vineyard for a while. So I love Australia. I'm very excited to be talking to you. Hopefully one day I'll be there in person talking to you as well. Okay, moving right along. Building Curious City. I want to take you through what we learned, what we tried, how we learned it. So in 2012, I was very lucky in that some money came into my kind of orbit via this Association of Independents in Radio, otherwise known as AIR. They were running this experiment around the United States called Localore. And what they were trying to do is see if they gave 10 producers around the country a bucket of money, what could they do that newsrooms could learn from and that they could innovate from, et cetera. So I was one of the lucky folks who got that money. It was $100,000, and it gave me a year's time to really experiment with an idea that I'd been noodling on for a while, but never had the budget to do. And so the idea was called Curious City. And the basic question I was trying to answer was, what would happen if we brought our audience into the editorial process before we published or broadcast our content? Would it change? Would it get better? Would it get muddy? What would happen? Because typically, this is how, oh, sorry, there's an animated GIF. I forgot. Isn't that great? We got a great logo there that moves. So anyway, traditionally, this is what journalism looks like for most newsrooms and most stories. It's that the public is not involved in any meaningful way until after all of the important decisions have been made about what to cover and why to cover it, et cetera. And so the moment of publication or broadcast, that's the moment typically where the public gets to say, hey, this is a great story, or maybe you missed a spot. Why didn't you interview this person instead? And that is the exact moment at publication or broadcast when the newsroom has to run on to their next story. So there's really no opportunity for the two parties to be learning from one another, colliding in a way that produces good outcomes. We know what happens when you invite comments. People are working on great projects in the space to help solve some of the commenting problems. But for the most part, this is an ill-designed space for really actionable feedback. And so what I was trying to do with Curious City is really flip this model on its head. powered story cycle, in part because none of these stories could actually get made unless the public was involved. So it wasn't like the public was, crowdsourcing and sending in photos of a storm when you asked them to. No, they were actually determining what you were doing outside of the newsroom. So it's pretty scary for a lot of people, but I thought it could work, and turns out it did. Spoiler. So in terms of the pitch phase, what we did is we wanted to collect the audience's questions. In other words, what don't they understand that they believe a newsroom has the resources and capacity to give them an answer to, a fact-checked, validated answer. So that was what we started with. Collect the public's questions. What don't they understand? We can help them figure out. Then at the assignment phase, we allowed newsrooms to curate the best questions that came in and let the public ultimately vote on which story they thought was most interesting to them. It's really kind of beta testing the idea before you put the time and energy and money into reporting. The third part, and this is actually my favorite part as a reporter, was working with the member of the public who had a question that we were answering to be part of that story. And that could be anything from going out in the field to a quick interview to having their photo on a story, just some meaningful interaction that made them part of the final production, whatever that is. So I'm going to take you through what we learned at these phases. So what we learned at the first phase of collecting people's questions is that, holy crap, the public has really great questions that lead to excellent stories, and stories we might not have ever thought to do. So this is just a very tiny sample of the hundreds and hundreds of stories that WBEZ and Curious City have done over the years. So people asking questions about, the location and quality of city playgrounds. That actually broke news, that story. We found that there was basically institutional racism in the Park District from this very kind of innocent sounding question. We had questions about Nike missile sites, things that happened during the Cold War. There's no way there would be a press conference about this, this potential, the story. But at the same time, the public was really excited to hear about things that happened long before kind of the usual pace of the news. So this is just like a small sample of the questions that people had. But what we proved was that the public has really great questions that are very helpful to a newsroom. And then at the assigning phase, what we found, this was really cool, is that when you let the public vote on each other's ideas, the people who have questions up for a vote are going to tell all of their friends because, of course, they want their 15 minutes of fame. They want their question answered. And this is great free marketing for a newsroom to have all the people who already know them tell all of their friends, you should pay attention to this newsroom. It's really good for growing your audience. And then the third part, actually working with the person whose question is being answered to have them physically come along on the reporting or be involved in a meaningful way, was super cool. It was essentially user testing, making sure the product you were making, whether that was an article or a video or a podcast, making sure that that actually suited the needs of the person you were making it for. So for software developers, this is totally second nature of user testing. But for journalists, they really never thought they had the luxury of time or really thought about user testing. They just had to crank things out, put it out there, the metrics would roll in, see if it worked, and really there's not a lot of reflection that happens. So that's kind of the main process and the main points of interaction with the public. So what was really cool to see is that people loved these stories. So just a little data point, but in 2014, only 2% of the stories posted to WBEZ.org were made with this special public-powered process, and they accounted for 41% of the top 50 stories posted on the website. So pound for pound, these stories outperformed the competition many, many times over. But was even cooler to me, this is really what I did and what I loved about starting this whole approach, is that it empowered people in really, really cool ways. So for instance, this is just like a mini case study. This woman, Janice Thompson, wanted to know how much of Chicago's energy came from natural gas via fracking. And so we did this kind of prototype of a reporter's notebook idea of kind of showing what we were finding along the way. We ended up reporting 2 stories, and we felt a little bit bummed because we did these 2 stories and we couldn't get Janice a great answer. And how we would gauge our success at Curious City is whether or not our question asker was satisfied, whether or not they found the information they needed and it was helpful to them, and they were really a surrogate for the rest of the audience. So we felt really sad that we couldn't answer her question because the process is super opaque, very complex. There are all sorts of incentives for these companies to not show how much comes from fracking. So we led Janice through this the whole way, kept her in the loop, kept her as part of the story. And what was super cool is that a year later, we found a blog post and we got a Google alert, of all things, that Janice Thompson had quit her job and decided to become a community-based educator on electricity choices. Because she was along for the process, she got to understand that this is not a subject best left to experts. It's actually something that all of us as a democratic society had the responsibility of learning and educating ourselves. And so she took it upon herself to start educating her community based on this. So a couple of cool quotes from the story. She said, you know, they made me feel like I was important as any expert, which was part of our whole process. And the more she learned about electricity, the more fascinated she became. And so she realized she was part of this responsibility. And so the quest she began as a curious citizen has culminated with this awesome launch. And she asked, this is the last question she asked in her write-up, was who knew a radio program could have so much power? So this to me is why I get up in the morning, is to basically help democratize the process of journalism and allow citizens who don't have access to people in power to get access to people in power or the information they hold in a streamlined way that newsrooms can be kind of the conduit between. Anyway, so that's kind of the whole spiel, so you know what I'm talking about here. And I'm going to go into the technical aspects of it, of how we grew this whole idea and approach pretty organically over time. So we started with what's called an MVP. You probably know this already, but a minimum viable product. So at the very beginning, before I had any money for tech, I was just like, do people have good questions? So I thought, what's an easy way to test that? I'll create a Google form. It's free. I sent it along to a bunch of friends, some family, some other folks. They sent me questions that I thought were fantastic. So I knew there was a there. I knew the public had great questions. But Google Forms proved to be an ugly, not very inspiring way of showing the public that they were special. Here, fill out this Google form. That doesn't feel very fun. And then we also couldn't accept votes in the same place. We would have to then spin up a different module and have all these different places to kind of take all of this intelligence and have it in one spot. We couldn't show all the questions that everybody had asked back to the audience, which transparency was important to us. So I'm going to take a drink. And then the newsroom website that we were really limited to couldn't embed Google Forms on their site. So the engagement that we wanted to create was limited by the technology that it was going to be living inside of. So $30,000. Sorry, I'm gonna take another drink. I'm gonna try not to cough here. My apologies for my voice. So we got $30,000, and with it, I spent money on some fabulous graphic designers and then some great coders to take this idea and make it feel much more special than a Google form. So we made an embeddable widget, and then we also made a website so that the public could go and do this interactivity without having to go to a website that was kind of janky looking, you know, more or less. And this was great, but we ended up using Google Sheets as the back end, which was a minimum viable product. Sorry, I'm gonna cough real quick. I apologize. I'm just gonna go off mic for a moment. Oh man, if only this weren't live on the internet. My apologies. Okay, so we ended up using Google Sheets as the back end because it was, you know, still workable, kind of around 500 or so questions that we had, and it wasn't terrible, it wasn't great. But as we started growing questions, as we started to try and categorize things, as we tried to share information with other reporters, we quickly ran into a phase that I like to call spreadsheet hell. So this is what our backend ended up looking like, is hundreds of documents, different spreadsheets and categories, trying to take Google Sheets and make it really actionable for the newsroom. So this ended up costing us a lot of time as reporters and producers and editors, trying to sort through this stuff, make sense of it, put it into, you know, action on our editorial, you know, to-do list. So it ended up being really actually time suck to use a free tool. So what I did next is I got $50,000 from the Knight Foundation to help us basically build a better spreadsheet, more or less. And we worked with a great company called ThoughtWorks. They have offices all around the world, in Australia as well. And we basically used Ruby on Rails and built a more stable backend than Google Forms. What I forgot to mention is that Google Forms, we ran into the limit. I think it was around 3,000 questions. It couldn't accept any more. So, we reached the end of the free technology. So we didn't intend to make tech. We only made tech because we had to. But the problem with this back end was that it was ugly for producers. We didn't get as far as we really wanted to on feature development. So it ended up basically just being kind of a glorified scaffolding of a spreadsheet. So we ran out of money to keep iterating, which was a bummer because we had such big ideas and hopes for how this backend could operate. So that's kind of where we were left at $80,000 worth of tech. We had this glorified spreadsheet on Ruby on Rails and a pretty front end, but the back end wasn't that great. So we reached the limit of our growth at WBEZ in terms of, the company itself didn't see a lot of value in taking the tech and continuing to invest in it. It worked fine as it was. And then I started to hear from other newsrooms that they were really interested in this model. But WBEZ wasn't in a position to become a purveyor of this process and model for the news industry. So I ended up leaving. And in 2014, even though I loved my job reporting these stories, creating the series, but I knew that there was something bigger here that I wanted to investigate. And so I launched Hearken in 2015, and Hearken means listen. And so what we do is we help news organizations listen to the public as a story develops from pitch to publication, using this public-powered journalism model that we started at WBEZ. And so I raised some more money. It's all kind of about fits and starts of raising money when I needed to. I don't code. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. But I've always been able to find really fantastic people to work with. And so when I started Hearken, it was myself, and then I found two coding geniuses. Corey Haynes is my co-founder and the CTO. He is a Ruby on Rails genius. He's written books about Ruby on Rails and about designing simply and all sorts of stuff. He's amazing. And then Sam was our lead developer, and he's really amazing at architecture and structure. So our tech costs are actually incredibly low. We can scale our platform across the world. We can get millions and millions of hits on our tech, and it hardly touches our bottom line whatsoever, which is great. So what we ended up building was a scalable platform. So before, Curious City was a single instance of this site. We did put it up as open source software on GitHub for other newsrooms to use, but it turned out most newsrooms didn't have the development expertise on staff to spin up, host, maintain, an actual code base that was, an open source code base. So in order for this to work for newsrooms, we actually had to make a self-service model that was scalable, that we would host and maintain. And so we created this platform that we had these curiosity modules that are embeddable, and you can design in different ways and place on your website. We have these voting modules as well. And then we have this new tool that we're beta testing right now called the Open Notebook, which allows reporters to show their work as they go before they publish. So there's kind of two main sides to the tech. There's the public facing and then the newsroom facing. So what the public interacts with, asking questions, voting, and then what the newsroom ends up seeing as, reporters, editors, producers, a place to keep everything organized in one place. And then it doesn't matter what the final product is, if it's a podcast or a video or an article, it's the same process. And the modules themselves we made to be very customizable. So in terms of look and feel and branding and whatever, they're also responsive, so they look good on whatever device. And then we now allow it so that newsrooms can embed these modules super simply. So whether that's in a story well, our partners at the BBC will often put them, in the actual context of a story. Other partners will put them as a sidebar or direct link in social media, or as, in the well of a Facebook instant article. My management system is really built to cut down on the coordination costs in a newsroom so that they're not spending so much time going between spreadsheets and all sorts of stuff. So there's cool things that we've been building since that Curious City days that are really about keeping your audience engaged throughout the process. So for instance, after people vote on a question, we've made it so that they can leave their email address when that question gets answered, in case they're not listening to the radio at that time or on Facebook when that story posts or whatnot. So it's about really this positive feedback loop with the audience. And then when people ask a question, we allow them to do things like subscribe to a newsletter or become a member or get deeper into that newsroom's ecosystem. And so, sorry, hitting next. All right. And then the Open Notebook is this new tool we're really excited about. We're in very early days with it right now, but we see some great promise. We see newsrooms, the New York Times and the Washington Post in the States have started kind of trying this transparent style of reporting, which shows us that they're thinking about it and other newsrooms are going to follow. And now we have a tool that any newsroom can use that allows them to create basically mini newsletters on a story-by-story basis, collecting people's emails, having them be part of the process, which is really great. So early days with Open Notebook, but we're really excited. And then in terms of existing platforms, a lot of people will ask us, why don't we just use Facebook or Twitter for this stuff? So we have to come up with great ideas and reasons as to why you should pay for a service beyond just what's out there and free. And we have lots of great reasons. These are 5 of about 50, but I don't want to overwhelm people. But we're designed for journalists. We're customizable. Newsrooms own their data instead of Facebook owning their data. That's a big thing. And we also provide a ton of consulting and training, because it turns out tech isn't the main problem for newsrooms adopting our model. It's a mindset shift about why they should put their audience at the center of their work. And that's a big, big lift. And then the open notebook is one thing that only we have. So in terms of how we've grown since I started in 2015, in July, we launched our beta platform and we had 3 people using it. Now we have 77 in countries around the world. If you see a little dot on Australia, we're working with the ABC. They have a series called Curious Canberra that is built on our model and runs our tech, which is super exciting. And they also did a national campaign called Curious Campaign for your federal election over the summer. So it's been fun and exciting to see this model take hold in a lot of newsrooms and to see them have the results that we had at Curious City as well. So these stories are performing much better because they're coming from actual audience need rather than newsroom assumptions. So I wanted to just end, I know I'm getting close to time here, with just a few tips and takeaways from over the years. One is just start small, and then wherever you think is your smallest point, see if you can start even smaller than that. That's something that my CTO, Corey Haynes, has really instilled into us, is you take a feature idea and just start breaking it apart like incrementally and see, all right, do I need this whole feature, or do I just need this one tiny, tiny part of it? And can I start with that? And if that works, I don't need to build the rest of it. So just really thinking about what is the least amount of work you can actually do to make the idea workable. And then another thing that he makes us do, which I really appreciate, is for every new feature, we have to ask ourselves, is it absolutely necessary? Because there's so many things we believe, it would be so cool if it could do this or that or something else. But if we had actually gone that route and we had built out our engagement management system to do everything we thought was cool, we would have such a bloated system that would require so much training for our partners to understand and use and see the impact of, that it would be overwhelming. So we actually, part of our whole kind of selling point is how simple we are. And we want to stay simple, because newsrooms actually, while they might say they would love all these 10 features, they won't use them. So keeping it simple is super important. I did want to say though, if you're building a tool just for yourself, go nuts. Like, make it as complex as you want if you're the only user. But if you want anyone else to use it, you need to understand there's going to be a huge learning curve. Every new feature you add is a whole new thing to teach someone. And that is either going to come out of your time or your design being so good that people totally understand how to use it. And then just prioritize features based on business value. If you're trying to create something that other people are going to want to use, it's either got to save you time and money in creating it, or the people that you're selling it to or who are using it time and money, or something of value. And so just by way of a quick example, at Hearken, we've been running into a lot of newsrooms wanting to customize their modules, like down to the outline color and the text color and whatnot. And we've been doing this all via CSS, and we do it kind of on a per needed basis. And now it's taking our front-end designer a lot of time to work with newsrooms. So we're implementing a change where newsrooms have full control over the color and look and feel. So this is a joke example my co-founder put in our Slack channel today of, hey, I created the best looking module yet. This is god-awful ugly. But just a joke showing like how crazy you can make these things look if you want them to now. So these are the types of things that'll save our business time and money, and that'll also save our users time and money, because they don't have to contact us and say, hey, could you make this sky blue instead of navy? That kind of thing. And then lastly, I've learned that process is actually more important than product. So as amazing as the tool is that you're creating, or the tech that you're creating, if who you're making it for, if it can't fit into their workflow, if they don't understand the process, if it can't be a seamless part of their day, then it does not matter. You can say it's going to change your life, it's going to make you $1 million. If it's not something that can fit into the context of how they think and do their work, then it's really worthless. So process is something we invest in heavily, and part of our team, three members of our team are tech, 3 members of our team are actually engagement consultants, helping newsrooms implement this process and start to think differently. Okay, so I knew I would need a sip of water right now, and that's the end of my presentation. So I'd love for you to ask me whatever questions. I hope this was intelligible, and I'm going to jump out of screen sharing.
All right. Let's hear it for Jennifer, yeah? There you are.
I'm so sorry.
Would anyone... Oh, it was perfect. It was wonderful. Does anyone have any questions that I could come up and ask? Don't be shy. Come on. So if you want to introduce yourself and say your newsroom, you can kind of make a line over here with other folks. But yeah.
Hi, Jennifer. My name's Simon. I work with the ABC.
Hi.
And I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about Notebook. I hadn't heard of it before, and it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so Notebook this has been something I've been actually wanting to do since 2011 when I wrote this proposal that ended up getting funded, was I was thinking about how can you involve the public as individuals and as a mass at every point of the editorial process before publication. And up until now, the reporting phase has largely been about newsrooms, you know, on their honor, saying that they're going to involve the question asker in some meaningful way. And now we're able to take this reporting phase from one person being involved to anyone being involved, so one to many. And so the idea is that news organizations produce far more information than they end up putting out into the world. So for any story you do, you probably collect 10 times more information. And 9/10 of that then ends up sitting in someone's notebook, locked in a drawer, in a Google Drive, wherever it is, where the people who are super geeked out about that topic would love to know the weird side stories and the tangents and the cool cutting room floor moments that you have to cut out of your story because of length or time or whatever that is. So it's a way of maximizing the value of the information created by the newsroom and a way of giving the public an opportunity to intervene when they have great information that a reporter could use. So as a reporter, I hated, this is the worst part, is putting a story out and then having someone say in the comments section, why didn't you interview Professor so-and-so? And meanwhile, I'd say, I didn't know about them. I look them up, I'll say, damn it, they would have been incredible to have been part of the story, but I just didn't know. So it's about having access to the most information from the people who care the most at the best time in the best context of creating a story. So that's kind of the very short version of the philosophy of it. How it works is that the newsroom creator, so reporter, producer, whoever, has a back end that has basically all of their notes stored. So whether that's photos or audio interviews or videos or little snippets of notes that they can store while they're creating a story, and then they can very easily send out dispatches over the course of the reporting, whether that story happens over the course of a couple days or a few weeks or a few months. They can say, here's what I learned today. Does anyone know someone I can interview about this topic, or whatever that may be? And all of that gets contained in this notebook, and reporters have control over what they show to the world and then what they keep for themselves. So does that help?
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
We had another question? Yeah? What?
Hi, Jennifer. My name's Taylor. I'm Alternative Hacks. You mentioned that bringing this product into a newsroom, tech wasn't the biggest challenge. It was shifting their mindset. So how did you shift the mindset, or how did you overcome that challenge?
Oh, every newsroom, it's a challenge to overcome. We're just pushing the rock up the hill. So what I'm happy to report is that in the year and a half since I started Hearken and pitching newsrooms, I don't get the question as often as to why should we listen to our audiences. Because the first 6 months or year, anytime a newsroom, we were gathered, we were talking about stuff, and I would be explaining things, there'd be someone in the room who would say, our audiences are a bunch of idiots and assholes. Why would we want to listen to them? And when they would say that, my heart would break, because I'm like, you have no idea how much value you're leaving on the table. Also, I feel sorry for you that your job is about serving people who you don't respect fundamentally. So that was something that we ran into. I would say since the presidential election in the United States, newsrooms have woken up that they haven't been listening to the public as much as they could have and should have been. So the conversation has changed a bit in the last even just few months, which has been good. But still there's just a lot of, a lot of issues about journalists thinking of themselves differently. So a lot of times journalists think of themselves as an expert or an authority figure or a gatekeeper, and that they need to keep all the information to themselves, and then they'll, dispense it to the world, and then they have to run on and do their next story. Whereas if you do that, you're actually sacrificing a lot of value for your newsroom, for your business model, for the public. So it's really every time it's about educating newsrooms. So our entire process of onboarding a newsroom is designed to give them a background as to why listening is important, and give them every reason we can possibly think of to have them glom onto it. Because some people are going to care about the bottom line, how many email addresses are we collecting? How much better are these stories performing? Other people are going to care about, is this going to make me a star reporter or give me original stories that nobody else is doing that are different from my competition? So we kind of have to have arguments for each point of the process and for each member of the newsroom. So from the reporter to their manager, to the boss, to the marketing people. Challenge. And, we don't have 100% conversion of the people who come to us and are interested and who come on board. So we're kind of waiting for the newsrooms who have the right people there and the right mindset and are, open to experimenting. And that's not everybody.
Anyone else?
Hi, Jennifer.
Howdy.
Step right up.
Hi. Just wondering what your experience has been like pitching to newsrooms. I noticed some of your clients are BBC, ABC. What's the split between publicly funded broadcasters and others? And what have you kind of found? Who's been most receptive to your platform?
And who are you?
I'm Jackson. I actually work for a public broadcaster.
Oh, great. Yeah. So, since I came out of public broadcasting, and we have so many examples of cool stories that are done, whether it's radio or podcast or whatnot, it's been easy for the word to spread within public broadcasting, especially in the United States, but then also public broadcasters around the world. So BBC, ABC, we work with YLE in Finland. We're going to be working with the Dutch broadcasters as well. So I think a lot of newsrooms, what I found is that every newsroom we speak with wants to see that this has worked in a newsroom pretty similar to theirs before they're ready to say yes. There are the early adopter types who are like, no, we're going to try it. I can totally see this. I don't need proof first. But for the most part, and it's just human nature, people want to know, will this work in a small newspaper? Will this work in a commercial TV station, et cetera? So over time, we've been accruing examples of pretty much every kind of newsroom you can imagine, so that we can then get to the next level of people who are afraid to try something new until someone else has proven it's okay. So it's just been a little painstaking in that way, but I would say about right now are nonprofit newsrooms, whether that's public radio or nonprofit digital only, topic-based newsrooms that might report on education or energy or something. But we do have examples that span TV and everything. So it's just kind of it's a long road into proving out for people who are at different levels of readiness of trying something new.
You have a couple more questions? Time for a couple more?
Oh, sure.
All right. I think we have at least one more. Right up.
Hey, Jennifer. I'm Inga. I work at the Sydney Morning Herald.
Oh, great.
And I was just wondering how the ideas and the principles behind Open Notebook and I guess the entire Curious City project stack up against what journalists seem to have traditionally done, which is hide their ideas, particularly from the competition, so you don't get scooped. If everyone knows you're working on a story, can't they do it faster and then just blow you out of the water?
That's a great question. We get it a lot. So I have like 10 different ways I like to respond to it, and I'll try and pick the right one. But basically, if you look at most newspapers or TV stations over the course of a day, and you compare their broadcasts to one another or their front pages or what's contained, I would argue that the bulk of the stories are the same. So it's clear that newsrooms don't care about doing the same story as everybody else because they do it all the time. So it's about, if we think about beating people in competition and newsrooms being optimized for speed, we see what happens when newsrooms are optimized for speed. They end up, having errors. They end up just trying to be the first person online to game the algorithm, to be the first one there, when really newsrooms need to be optimized for trust. now more than anything, especially in the United States. I know it's not true for every country that they have a crisis in trust in the news media, but especially in the US, we're feeling that right now. So if you don't have trust of the audience, it doesn't matter if you're first, and it doesn't matter if you got scooped, because no one's going to care. The other thing is that your audiences are separate. So yes, you might have someone who reads the Sydney Morning Herald and listens to ABC and might hear stories on the same, day, or read stories on the same day, but largely you're going to have a lot of people who are only going to see the story or hear the story on your newsroom site, and you're going to be able to answer it in a different way than your competition. The other thing is that when the question asker is part of the process and you bake them into it, you have the benefit of their entire network and them being super excited and sharing it with all of their friends, which your competition won't have. If they just see you're working on answering, can you swim in Lake George? And 3 newsrooms answer it a different way. The newsroom that has the person who asks the question, who's the focal point of the story, who's a very relatable character for the audience, is going to perform a lot better than just someone answering the question yes or no, or in whatever way they can. So it's kind of nuanced, but I would say competition is not as much of a concern, I think, anymore. As the ecosystem keeps shrinking, I see a lot more collaborations happening between newsrooms, and thinking about, instead of how do we beat the competition, is how do we serve society and how do we uphold the principles of democracy is now superseded that idea of competition.
Any last queries? Yes. Oh, you were online. They formed a queue.
Hi.
Okay.
I'm Craig. I'm a journalist at The Age, which is a newspaper based in Melbourne. My question, it's all because your platform's all to do with audience, new audience members sort of submitting questions and then being voted up. Have you had to devise any strategies for dealing with sort of astroturfers or perhaps trolls who are going to go in there and post scurrilous questions or try to vote up, bizarre things that they've posted up there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So unlike Reddit or some of these forums where it's like Lord of the Flies, anything can be voted up and reach to the top, we have safeguards in place with our process. So a newsroom has to curate the question in order for it to make it to a vote. So if someone asks a terrible question, it's never going to be able to be voted on unless the newsroom consciously decides we want people to vote on this. So first and foremost, you won't put questions up for a vote that seem like they have a vested interest, that are biased on the face of it, and that are something that you would never consider covering. So you're already safe, because if you put questions up for a vote, you're acknowledging as a newsroom, whatever wins, we're happy to report on. Community gets involved and they're like, oh, we really care about clean air, and there's a clean air question, and we're going to tell everybody we know to vote for this. Well, that's fantastic. That question might win hugely because there's a lot of people who have been galvanized and who are interested and who are showing that they're going to read that story when you put it out there and share it and be part of that conversation. So to us, it's great. And voting also is not scientific. It's not like you leave it up for a year and then totally understand what people are interested in or curious about. We recommend people leave it up for as long as they want, and it becomes clear pretty quickly as to which story has the most traction. And it's great if people are spreading the word and telling people to vote for one question over another.
Last chance. No? All right. You want to give it up for Jennifer again?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for your time. Good luck. I can't wait to hear what everybody makes.
All right. Sweet. Meet me.
Okay. Bye-bye.